A young black girl stepped onto the witness stand as the prosecutor began mocking her testimony. But when she calmly stated the name of the prestigious law firm that had trained her, everything changed. The entire courtroom fell silent. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Reed's heels clicked against the marble floor of the courthouse hallway, echoing like a metronome counting down to victory. The Jefferson County Courthouse had seen its share of high-profile cases, but this one promised to cement her reputation as the most formidable prosecutor in the state. 3 years of meticulous climbing through the ranks had led to this moment, her first murder trial as lead prosecutor. She paused before the heavy oak doors, adjusting her impeccably tailored charcoal suit. At 32, Caroline had crafted her image with surgical precision. Blonde hair cut in a severe bob, makeup understated but flawless, posture that communicated authority without saying a word. Everything about her had been calibrated for this environment, this moment. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed as she strode into the courtroom, her expression a careful mask of professional detachment. The audience settled back into their seats as Judge Martin Harrington nodded at her to proceed. The prosecution calls Zoe Williams to the stand. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom as a slender black girl made her way to the witness box. Just 12 years old, Zoe walked with her shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. Her navy blue dress hung slightly loose on her small frame, a gold barrette catching the fluorescent lights as she moved. The gravity of the situation seemed to press down on her, making each step look painfully deliberate. Caroline watched the girl take the oath, cataloging every detail of her appearance and demeanor. The case against Derek Williams, Zoe's 20-year-old brother, hinged on this child's testimony. If Caroline could break her, the jury would have no choice but to convict. "Zoe," Caroline began, her voice precisely modulated to project both authority and false warmth. "Thank you for coming today. I know this must be difficult for you." The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress beneath the witness stand where the jury couldn't see. "I need you to tell the court where you were on the night of April 15th. "I was at home," Zoe answered, her voice so soft the court reporter had to lean forward. "And who was at home with you that night?" "My mama. And Derek." Caroline nodded, pacing deliberately before the witness stand. "What time did your brother, the defendant, leave the house that night?" Zoe's eyes flickered briefly toward her brother at the defense table. "He didn't leave." Caroline's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Zoe, we have witnesses who saw your brother near Johnson Street at approximately 10:30 p.m. Are you saying all those people are lying?" "Objection," badgering the witness. Public Defender Michael Chen called out from the defense table. "Sustained," Judge Harrington rumbled. "Rephrase, Ms. Reed." Caroline inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Let me approach this differently. Zoe, did you see your brother at 10:30 p.m. that night?" The girl hesitated, and Caroline sensed vulnerability, a crack in the facade. I think so. We was watching TV." "You think so? Earlier you seemed quite certain." Caroline moved closer to the witness stand. "Which is it, Zoe? Was he home all night, or are you just not sure anymore?" "Objection." Chen was on his feet again. "Overruled. The witness may answer." Zoe's lower lip trembled slightly. "He was home. I remember 'cause we was watching that cooking show Mama likes." Caroline's smile tightened as she picked up a folder from the prosecution table. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence phone records showing a call made from the defendant's phone at 10:42 p.m., pinging from a tower near the crime scene, 3 miles from the Williams residence." The courtroom stirred as Caroline turned back to Zoe, whose eyes had widened. "So you see, Zoe, either your brother wasn't home watching TV with you, or someone else was using his phone near where Marcus Taylor was shot and killed. Which is it? I don't know about no phone, Zoe stammered. Your brother is facing life in prison, Caroline pressed, her voice taking on an edge. This isn't the time for confusion or protecting family. This is about telling the truth. Tears welled in Zoe's eyes, but Caroline saw only weakness to exploit. The courtroom faded away as she focused on breaking down the girl's resistance. This was the moment she'd been trained for, finding the pressure point and pushing until something gave. Let's try again. Where was your brother at 10:42 p.m.? I told you he was home, Zoe insisted, a tear sliding down her cheek. Caroline felt a surge of satisfaction. The jury would see those tears as guilt, as knowledge being hidden. She moved in for the kill. Zoe, do you understand what perjury is? Objection, Chen shouted. Counsel is intimidating a minor witness. Sustained, Judge Harrington said sharply. Ms. Reed, be mindful of the witness's age. Caroline nodded, feigning contrition while inwardly calculating her next move. My apologies, Your Honor. She turned back to Zoe with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Zoe, why are you so confused about such an important night? I'm not confused, Zoe whispered. Then why can't you explain how your brother's phone was miles away while he was supposedly watching TV with you? The girl stared down at her hands. Maybe he lent it to somebody. Lent it to somebody, Caroline repeated, making no effort to hide the mockery in her tone. How convenient. And I suppose this mysterious somebody just happened to be in the exact area where Marcus Taylor was murdered? She let out a small, theatrical laugh. Come now, Zoe. Even a child should be able to come up with a better story than that. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter paused, fingers hovering above her stenotype. Judge Harrington's brow furrowed, but before he could intervene, something changed in Zoe's demeanor. The girl straightened in her seat, her gaze lifting to meet Caroline's for the first time. There was something in those eyes that made Caroline falter, a clarity, a certainty that hadn't been there moments before. My brother was home with me and my mama all night, Zoe said, her voice suddenly stronger. And I know what you're doing because I heard you practicing it. Caroline froze. Excuse me? At Blackwell and Stern, in the conference room with the blue chairs. Zoe's voice was steady now, her eyes never leaving Caroline's face. You were there with the other lawyers, talking about how to make me look like I was lying even if I was telling the truth. You said black kids from my neighborhood don't know how to stand up to authority figures, so you just had to push hard enough and I'd break. The blood drained from Caroline's face. Blackwell and Stern, the prestigious law firm where she'd worked before joining the DA's office. The firm that still provided strategic consultation to the county prosecutor's office through a special arrangement. The firm that had taught her exactly how to handle witnesses like Zoe. Your Honor, Caroline managed, this is completely inappropriate. Let the witness continue, Judge Harrington interrupted, his expression unreadable. My mama cleans that building at night, Zoe said. Sometimes she takes me when my brother has late classes. I was doing homework in the little room next to that big conference room. The door was open a little bit. I heard everything. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Caroline felt the case slipping through her fingers like sand, but worse was the realization that her carefully constructed professional image was cracking in full public view. You had a picture of me, Zoe continued, her voice cutting through the noise. You were showing the other lawyers and saying, "This is our problem witness." You practiced saying the exact same things you just said to me, and then you all laughed. Caroline turned desperately toward the judge. Your Honor, this is absurd. The witness is clearly... Ms. Reed, Judge Harrington cut her off. Approach the bench. Mr. Chen, you too. As Caroline moved forward on legs that suddenly felt unsteady, She caught sight of Public Defender Chen's expression, a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Behind her, the gallery buzzed with whispers, the reporters in the back row already typing frantically on their phones. The damage control would have to be immediate and absolute. But even as Caroline's mind raced through potential explanations and deflections, she knew that something fundamental had shifted in the courtroom. A child had just exposed what years of law school and professional training had taught her to disguise, that sometimes winning mattered more than justice. And now, as Judge Harrington's stern gaze met hers over the bench, Caroline Reed began to understand that the trial taking an unexpected turn was the least of her problems. The sidebar at the judge's bench lasted precisely 7 minutes, but to Caroline Reed, it felt like an eternity. Judge Harrington's voice remained low, but the tension in his weathered face spoke volumes. "Ms. Reed, if what this child is saying has any basis in fact, we're looking at a mistrial, at minimum." "Your Honor, the witness is clearly confused," Caroline insisted. "I've never discussed this case at Blackwell and Stern. I left the firm 3 years ago." Michael Chen's normally pleasant expression had hardened into something Caroline had never seen before. "Your Honor, the DA's office has a well-known consulting arrangement with Blackwell and Stern. I've filed motions questioning the ethics of this relationship in the past." "Those motions were dismissed," Caroline shot back. "Because Blackwell's senior partners golf with Judge Whitman," Chen replied evenly. "Not because the concern wasn't valid." Judge Harrington held up his hand, silencing them both. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to adjourn for the day. Ms. Reed, I want a full disclosure of any and all strategy sessions regarding this case, including attendees, dates, and content. Mr. Chen, prepare your motion for mistrial, but don't file it yet." He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "And neither of you is to approach that child without her mother and appropriate representation present. Clear?" They nodded in unison, the rare moment of agreement underscoring the gravity of the situation. When the judge called the court back to order, the gallery fell silent, journalists poised with their notepads and tablets. Caroline felt their eyes on her back, dissecting her posture for signs of guilt or discomfort. She maintained her composure through sheer force of will, though inside, a storm was brewing. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m., Judge Harrington announced. "Ms. Williams, you are excused for today but remain under oath and subject to recall. Everyone else is to remain in place until the witness has been escorted out." As the bailiff led Zoe from the courtroom, Caroline noticed something she'd missed before: the quiet dignity with which the girl carried herself, so at odds with the nervous child who had first taken the stand. Her brother Derek, seated at the defense table, watched his sister leave with an expression that mingled pride with fear. Once the doors closed behind Zoe, the courtroom erupted. Caroline gathered her materials quickly, ignoring the reporters who called her name as she strode toward the exit. She needed to reach District Attorney Richard Mercer before the news did. The DA's office was a 14-minute drive from the courthouse, but Caroline made it in 11, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her mind raced through the implications of Zoe's testimony. If what the girl said was true, and Caroline knew with sickening certainty that it was, then someone at Blackwell and Stern had seriously compromised operational security during their strategy sessions. But more importantly, the case against Derek Williams was now in jeopardy. A case that was supposed to demonstrate the office's commitment to fighting gang violence. A case that Mercer had personally assured the mayor would result in a conviction. Mercer's assistant tried to intercept her, but Caroline brushed past him, entering the district attorney's office without knocking. Richard Mercer was on the phone, his tall frame bent forward over his desk, but he looked up sharply at the intrusion. "I'll call you back," he said, then hung up without waiting for a response. "This better be good, Reed." "We have a problem with the Williams case," she said, closing the door behind her. Mercer's expression darkened. At 57, with salt and pepper hair and a politician's smile, he projected an image of distinguished authority. But those who worked under him knew his smile disappeared quickly when things went wrong. What kind of problem? Caroline took a deep breath. The defendant's sister just testified that she overheard our strategy session at Blackwell and Stern. She was in the building with her mother, who apparently works on the cleaning staff. Mercer stared at her, then slowly removed his glasses. Tell me exactly what she heard. As Caroline recounted Zoe's testimony, Mercer's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, resolution. Harrington adjourned until tomorrow? Caroline nodded. He wants a full disclosure of all strategy sessions. Which you will provide, Mercer said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. He picked up his phone. Georgia, get Arthur Blackwell on the line. Tell him it's urgent. While they waited, Mercer fixed Caroline with a penetrating stare. Did you actually say those things about black children from that neighborhood not standing up to authority? Caroline hesitated, her normally quick mind suddenly sluggish. Not in those exact words, but close enough. It wasn't a question, and Caroline didn't treat it as one. She'd been handpicked by Mercer for her ability to win cases by any means necessary. They both knew the kinds of conversations that happened behind closed doors. Mercer's phone buzzed. Arthur Blackwell for you, sir. Arthur, Mercer said, his voice suddenly warm as he put the call on speaker. We have a situation involving your firm and a current prosecution. Caroline listened as Mercer outlined the issue in carefully neutral terms. A strategy session, a witness who overheard something potentially problematic, a judge asking questions. He never once mentioned Zoe by name or the specific content of what she'd heard. I'll look into it immediately, Blackwell replied, his aristocratic drawl at odds with the tension in his voice. We have strict protocols about confidentiality during consultations. Protocols that evidently failed, Mercer noted. That remains to be seen, Blackwell countered. I'll need to know which of our consultants was involved and exactly what this witness claims to have heard. Caroline caught Mercer's eye, shaking her head slightly. Giving Blackwell too much information now could be dangerous. We'll discuss details in person, Mercer said smoothly. My office, 1 hour. After ending the call, Mercer turned back to Caroline. This case is high profile, Reed. The mayor is watching. The press is watching. We can't afford a mistrial based on some cleaning lady's kid spinning tales. She wasn't spinning tales, Caroline admitted quietly. What she described, the conference room with blue chairs, the specific things said, it happened. About 3 weeks ago. Mercer's expression hardened. Then we have a serious problem. He stood, adjusting his tie. Go back to your office. Review your notes. Document everything about that strategy session, but do not discuss this with anyone else. I'll handle Blackwell. As Caroline turned to leave, Mercer added, And Reed, if this case falls apart, you'd better have a contingency plan. The threat wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. In the hierarchy of the DA's office, success meant protection. Failure meant becoming a scapegoat. Back in her office, Caroline closed the blinds and sank into her chair. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly. Colleagues who'd heard about the courtroom drama, journalists seeking comment, and a particularly persistent call from a number she didn't recognize. Finally, she answered it. Caroline Reed. Ms. Reed. The voice was female, authoritative, unfamiliar. This is Detective Sloan Donovan, Internal Affairs. I've been trying to reach you. Caroline's stomach tightened. What can I do for you, Detective? We need to discuss your relationship with Blackwell and Stern. specifically as it pertains to case preparation against minority defendants. The detective's tone was professionally neutral, but Caroline detected something else beneath it. Determination, perhaps even anger. "Judge Harrington has requested our involvement." "I'm in the middle of an active trial," Caroline deflected. "Any discussions would need to go through the DA's office and—" "Ms. Reed," Donovan interrupted, "this isn't a request. This is now an official investigation. We can meet at your office or you can come to mine. Your choice, but it's happening today." As the call ended, Caroline stared at the case files spread across her desk. The photograph of Zoe Williams lay on top, the same one she'd shown during that strategy session while explaining how to break the girl's testimony. In the photo, Zoe was sitting on her front porch, face half turned away from the camera, unaware she was being photographed. She looked even younger than her 12 years. Caroline had been so focused on winning that she'd never stopped to consider the lives she was impacting. Now, as her carefully constructed career threatened to unravel, she wondered what else she'd failed to see. Michael Chen had been a public defender for 7 years, long enough to become intimately familiar with the workings of the Jefferson County justice system, with all its official protocols and unspoken rules. He'd lost more cases than he'd won, a reality for most public defenders facing the DA's vastly superior resources. But he'd never stopped fighting. As he watched Caroline Reed hurry from the courtroom, Chen felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly. He'd long suspected the DA's office had an improper relationship with Blackwell and Stern, but also concern for his client, Derek Williams, whose future still hung in the balance. "What just happened?" Derek whispered, his lanky frame hunched forward, handcuffs clinking as he leaned toward Chen. At 20, he looked younger than his years, with a face that hadn't fully lost its boyish roundness. "Is this good for us?" "It could be," Chen replied cautiously, "but let's talk somewhere private." Once they were alone in a consultation room, Chen laid it out plainly. "Your sister just blew a hole in the prosecution's case. She revealed that Reed and her team specifically strategized about how to discredit her testimony, even though they knew she was telling the truth." "So they knew I was innocent?" Derek's voice rose. "They knew I was home that night?" Chen held up a hand. "What they knew and what they were willing to prove in court are different things. The prosecution builds cases to win, not necessarily to find the truth." "That's messed up," Derek muttered, slumping back in his chair. "It is," Chen agreed, "and now it might work in our favor." He studied his client carefully. "But I need you to be straight with me, Derek. Was Zoe telling the truth? Were you really home all night?" Derek met his gaze steadily. "Yes. I was home with Zoe and Mama. My phone was stolen 2 days before at the community college. I reported it, but the police never followed up. They just saw my name, saw I had a sealed juvenile record, and decided I was their guy." Chen nodded slowly. He'd requested the phone theft report during discovery, but had been told no such report existed. Now he wondered if it had been deliberately withheld. "I need to check something," he said, pulling out his phone. He dialed the public defender's office, speaking briefly with a colleague. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "The recordings of all 911 and non-emergency calls from that week have mysteriously gone missing from the system. Someone's covering tracks." "So what happens now?" Derek asked. "Now," Chen said, gathering his notes, "I file motions for dismissal, for sanctions against the DA's office, and for an investigation into their relationship with Blackwell and Stern. And you," he added with the hint of a smile, "you keep your head down and let your sister be the hero she is." Across town, in an office decorated with expensive art and dark wood furniture, Arthur Blackwell paced before his window. The view of downtown normally calmed him, but not today. The call from Richard Mercer had unleashed a flurry of activity: emergency meetings with senior partners, hasty document reviews, and increasingly panicked calls with the firm's crisis management team. "It's contained for now," Elliot Stern, his partner of 30 years, assured him. "The janitor has been terminated, of course." "And the child?" Blackwell asked, not bothering to disguise his distaste. Stern frowned. "We can hardly terminate a 12-year-old witness, Arthur." "Don't be obtuse. What do we know about her?" "Zoe Williams, straight-A student despite attending one of the worst schools in the district. Mother works 2 jobs, our night cleaning shift and days at a nursing home. No father in the picture." Stern glanced at his notes. "Brother Derek has a sealed juvenile record for a fight when he was 16, but otherwise clean. Currently enrolled at Jefferson Community College, studying computer science." Blackwell grunted. "Hardly sounds like the gang member the DA's office painted him as." "That's the point, isn't it?" Stern replied mildly. "We craft narratives to fit our clients' needs. The DA needed a conviction to boost their gang task force statistics. And now that narrative is falling apart because a child was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Blackwell checked his watch. "Mercer will be expecting answers I don't have." "Then give him what we always give difficult clients," Stern suggested: confidence and plausible deniability. Detective Sloane Donovan had built her career in internal affairs by being thorough, methodical, and immune to intimidation. At 43, she'd investigated corrupt cops, bribed officials, and evidence tampering. The case that landed on her desk today, however, touched on something that made her personal radar ping loudly. "The Williams case file, as requested," her partner, Detective Marcus Rivera, said, dropping a thick folder on her desk. "Interesting reading." "Summarize," Donovan replied, scanning the first page. "Derek Williams, 20, black, arrested for the murder of Marcus Taylor, alleged gang-related shooting. Evidence is circumstantial at best. Cell phone location data, a witness who saw someone of his general description near the scene, and a confidential informant who claims Williams has gang connections." "Confidential informant," Donovan repeated skeptically. "Reliable?" Rivera shook his head. "CI 456 has provided information in 27 cases in the last 3 years. All defendants were young black or Latino men from the same 5 neighborhoods. All were charged with gang-related crimes. 21 pled out rather than risk trial." "And what do we know about CI 456's true identity?" "That," Rivera said, "is where it gets interesting. The file containing CI identities was misplaced during a system upgrade last year. Only 2 people have accessed the backup file: DA Richard Mercer and someone using Caroline Reed's credentials." Donovan leaned back, processing this. "So the DA's office is running a confidential informant whose identity is hidden even from the department, using this CI to build gang cases against minorities, and partnering with a prestigious law firm to strategize how to discredit truthful witnesses." She whistled softly. "No wonder Judge Harrington called us in." "Speaking of Harrington," Rivera added, "he sent over his own notes on 6 other cases where defense attorneys raised concerns about the DA's relationship with Blackwell and Stern. All motions were denied by other judges." "Let me guess," Donovan said. "Judges who have connections to the firm?" Rivera nodded. 4 were former Blackwell and Stern attorneys. 1 has a spouse currently employed there. The 6th plays poker weekly with Arthur Blackwell. "This city," Donovan muttered, disgusted but not surprised. "And now it all threatens to unravel because of one observant 12-year-old girl." She stood, grabbing her jacket. "I'm heading to interview Caroline Reed. Keep digging into those other cases. I want to know if this is a pattern of civil rights violations we can take to the feds." Caroline Reed chose to meet Detective Donovan at the Internal Affairs office, away from the prying eyes of her colleagues. She'd spent the intervening hour reviewing her case notes and rehearsing responses to likely questions. Walking into the austere interview room, she projected confidence she didn't entirely feel. Detective Donovan was waiting, case files spread before her. She was a striking woman with dark skin, close-cropped silver hair, and penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through Caroline's practiced facade. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Reed," Donovan said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "This is an informal discussion, for now." The implication was clear. Cooperation now might prevent a formal investigation later. Caroline sat, smoothing her skirt. "I have nothing to hide, Detective." "Excellent," Donovan smiled thinly. "Then you won't mind explaining the consulting arrangement between the DA's office and Blackwell and Stern, particularly as it pertains to case preparation against minority defendants." "The firm provides legal consultation on complex cases," Caroline replied evenly. "It's a standard arrangement. Many prosecutors' offices have similar relationships with private firms." "What's not standard," Donovan countered, "is having those firms develop strategies to discredit truthful witnesses, especially child witnesses." Caroline's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We don't know that the Williams girl was telling the truth. Children can be coached, influenced." "Like you were planning to influence her on the stand?" Donovan interrupted, opening a file. "According to your own notes from the strategy session at Blackwell and Stern, which I've just received from Judge Harrington, your approach was to, and I quote, use cultural and socioeconomic factors to undermine the witness's confidence regardless of factual accuracy." Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. She'd forgotten about those notes, detailed minutes she'd prepared for Mercer after the session. Notes that apparently had made their way to the judge. "That's standard cross-examination strategy," she managed. "Is it also standard to deliberately withhold evidence of a phone theft report that would have exonerated your defendant?" Donovan asked, producing another document. "Because we found that report. It was filed 2 days before the murder, exactly as Derek Williams claimed." For the first time in her career, Caroline Reed found herself truly speechless. Letitia Williams had raised her children to tell the truth, even when, especially when, that truth was difficult. But watching her daughter's testimony splashed across the evening news, she felt a complicated surge of pride and terror. Pride in Zoe's courage, terror at what it might cost them all. Their apartment in the Oakwood Heights complex was modest but meticulously maintained. Letitia had converted the small dining area into a study space for her children, with a fold-out table covered in textbooks and a wall calendar marked with work shifts, school events, and Derek's college class schedule. Tonight, that space had become a war room of sorts, with Michael Chen seated at the table, legal papers spread before him. "They fired me," Letitia said quietly, returning from the kitchen with mugs of coffee. "Blackwell and Stern said it was for breach of confidentiality protocols." Chen's jaw tightened. "That's retaliation. We'll add it to the lawsuit." "Lawsuit?" Zoe looked up from her homework, eyes wide. "Civil rights violation," Chen explained gently. "What happened to your family? Derek's wrongful prosecution, your mother's firing. It's part of a pattern we're uncovering." Letitia sank into a chair, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. At 41, she looked a decade older, years of working multiple jobs etched into the lines around her eyes. "We can't afford a lawsuit. I can barely afford rent with both jobs, and now I've lost one." "The ACLU has already reached out," Chen assured her. "They're willing to take the case pro bono, and the nurses' union at your day job has set up a support fund." "People care about what happened to us?" Zoe asked, surprise evident in her voice. "More than care," Chen replied, sliding his tablet across the table to show them a local news website. "You've sparked something important." The headline read, Witness intimidation allegations rocked his office. Protests planned. Below it was a photo of protesters gathering outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for Derek Williams," and "Prosecute the prosecutors." "This is bigger than just your case now," Chen continued. "People are talking about how the system criminalizes young black men, how prosecutors build careers on convictions rather than justice." Letitia squeezed Zoe's hand. "Your brother could have gone to prison for life," she said softly. "Because of you, he has a chance now." Zoe's expression was solemn beyond her years. "I was scared," she admitted. "But when that lady started talking to me like I was stupid or lying, I remembered her voice from that night. The same exact words, the same laugh when she practiced how to make me mess up." Chen nodded, making notes. "Judge Harrington wants you to testify again, this time about what you overheard at the law firm. Would you be willing to do that?" Zoe looked to her mother, who nodded encouragement. "Yes," she decided. "I'll tell what I heard." Chen's phone buzzed with a text. He read it, his expression shifting to one of cautious optimism. "That was Detective Donovan from Internal Affairs. They've located records confirming Derek's phone was stolen, just like he said." He looked up at Letitia. "She wants to interview Zoe tomorrow, with your permission." "Will it help Derek come home?" Letitia asked. "I believe it will," Chen replied. "The case against him is falling apart, and the real focus now is on misconduct by the DA's office and Blackwell and Stern." As if on cue, Zoe's phone chimed with a news alert. She read it, her eyes widening. "Mom, someone leaked files from the law firm to the newspaper. It says they have special teams for cases with, what's minority defendants?" Chen took the phone, scanning the article quickly. "This is significant," he murmured. "They're reporting that Blackwell and Stern maintained separate strategy protocols for cases involving minority defendants versus white defendants." He looked up. Someone inside the firm is blowing the whistle. Letitia's expression hardened. "All these years I cleaned their offices while they plotted how to send people like my son to prison." She shook her head slowly. "Never again." Richard Mercer's meeting with Arthur Blackwell had not gone as planned. Instead of solutions, Blackwell had offered only vague assurances and implied threats about mutual interests and shared vulnerability. Now, alone in his office with the latest news reports scrolling across his screen, Mercer faced the unpleasant reality that damage control might no longer be possible. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Reed is here as requested." "Send her in." Caroline entered, looking significantly less polished than she had that morning. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup worn. The confident stride had been replaced by a more hesitant gait. "Sit down," Mercer instructed, not bothering with pleasantries. "I've just been briefed on your meeting with Internal Affairs." Caroline sank into the chair opposite his desk. "Detective Donovan had documentation I wasn't expecting. Notes from the strategy session, the missing phone theft report." She trailed off. "Sir, I think someone at Blackwell and Stern may be cooperating with the investigation." "Clearly," Mercer snapped, turning his monitor to show her the latest headlines. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Caroline scanned the article, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. They're describing a systematic approach to prosecuting minority defendants. Different playbooks, different strategy teams." She looked up. "Did you know about this?" Mercer's expression hardened. "Of course I knew. I implemented most of those protocols during my time at the firm. They were effective then, and they've been effective for this office. But sir, this is explicit bias. If these documents are authenticated—" "They won't be," Mercer cut her off. "Blackwell is already claiming they're fabricated or taken out of context." He leaned forward. "The firm is closing ranks, Reed. The question is, are you inside or outside those ranks?" Caroline hesitated, understanding the implicit threat. What exactly are you asking me to do? Tomorrow, you'll file a motion requesting dismissal of charges against Derek Williams, citing newly discovered evidence of the phone theft. You'll express appropriate regret for the oversight but maintain it was a good-faith error. Nothing about Blackwell and Stern. Nothing about strategy sessions targeting minority witnesses. And if I'm questioned under oath about those sessions? Mercer's smile was cold. Memory is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Details blur, contexts shift. I'm sure you'll recall the broad strokes while finding the specifics elusive. Caroline felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office temperature. You're asking me to perjure myself. I'm asking you to protect your career, your future, and the integrity of this office. Mercer's tone left no room for debate. The choice is simple. Be the scapegoat or be the survivor. Detective Sloane Donovan had expected resistance from the DA's office. What she hadn't expected was the anonymous thumb drive delivered to her department, or the explosive contents it contained. "It's all here," her partner Rivera said, voice hushed as they reviewed the files in their secure office. Blackwell and Stern's entire playbook for what they call community demographic targeting, training manuals for new associates on how to advise prosecutors handling cases with minority defendants. Donovan scrolled through document after document, her expression grim. Look at these case statistics. Over the past 5 years, the conviction rate for Black and Latino defendants prosecuted with Blackwell and Stern consultation is 91%. For white defendants from affluent neighborhoods, 46%. And here's the money trail, Rivera added, pulling up financial records. The firm bills the county based on conviction success. They literally profit more when minorities are convicted. Donovan sat back, processing the implications. This goes beyond one case or one prosecutor. This is systemic. The question is, who sent this? Rivera gestured to the thumb drive. Someone inside the firm took an enormous risk. Someone with a conscience, Donovan replied, already reaching for her phone. I need to call Judge Harrington. This changes everything. We need to involve the Department of Justice. This is a pattern of civil rights violations across potentially hundreds of cases. As she dialed, Donovan thought about Zoe Williams, a 12-year-old girl whose simple act of truth-telling had begun to unravel a corrupt system that had operated unchallenged for years. Sometimes, she reflected, justice arrived in the most unexpected packages. The courthouse steps had become a battleground of competing narratives. News vans lined the street, reporters clutching microphones jostled for position, and demonstrators on both sides waved signs and chanted slogans. What had begun as a routine murder trial was now the epicenter of a rapidly expanding scandal that threatened to consume the city's entire legal establishment. Judge Martin Harrington watched the scene from his chamber window, his weathered face a mask of concentration. At 68, he'd seen his share of corruption, but the documents spread across his desk represented something different, something more insidious and far-reaching than he'd initially suspected. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. His clerk, James Peterson, stepped inside. "Detective Donovan is here, Your Honor, with Agent Keller from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division." Harrington nodded. "Send them in." Donovan entered first, followed by a tall, austere woman in a crisp, dark suit. "Judge Harrington, this is Special Agent Diana Keller." Donovan made the introduction. "The Department of Justice has agreed to open a preliminary investigation based on the evidence we've gathered." "That was quick," Harrington observed, gesturing for them to sit. "The evidence is compelling," Agent Keller replied, her voice precise and measured. "And unfortunately, not unique. We've seen similar patterns in other jurisdictions, law firms and prosecutors' offices collaborating to increase conviction rates for minority defendants through questionable methods." Harrington slid a folder across his desk. "Then you'll want to see this." My staff has identified 47 cases in the past 3 years where Blackwell and Stern consulted on prosecutions involving minority defendants. In 42 of those cases, the defendants accepted plea deals despite questionable evidence. They never had a chance, Donovan said softly. The Williams case is different only because the defendant's sister happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, or the right time, depending on your perspective, Harrington added. Agent Keller opened the folder, scanning its contents. I'll need to interview the Williams girl and review the original strategy session documentation. The hearing resumes at 9 tomorrow, Harrington said. I've issued subpoenas for all records related to Blackwell and Stern's consulting work with the DA's office. If they attempt to quash those subpoenas, they will, Keller interjected. When they do, Harrington continued, it will only strengthen the case for federal intervention. Donovan leaned forward. There's something else you should know. We've identified the whistleblower who sent us the documentation. Harrington raised an eyebrow. From inside Blackwell and Stern? Yes. A junior associate named Alicia Mendoza. She's willing to testify, but she's concerned about her safety. The firm has already made thinly veiled threats about her career prospects. I want her under protection, Harrington said immediately. And I want her testimony scheduled for tomorrow's hearing. Agent Keller nodded, making notes. We'll ensure she's protected. In the meantime, I'd like to interview Caroline Reed. Good luck with that, Donovan replied. After our meeting yesterday, she's lawyered up, and not with someone from the DA's office. She's hired private counsel. Harrington's expression darkened. Interesting choice. Almost as if she doesn't trust her colleagues to protect her interests. Or, Agent Keller suggested, as if she's preparing to protect herself at their expense. Caroline Reed had never imagined hiring criminal defense attorney Sophia Washington to represent her, but desperate times called for desperate measures. They sat in Washington's sleek downtown office, the city lights twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as evening descended. Let me be absolutely clear, Washington said, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed the case files. District Attorney Mercer explicitly asked you to mislead the court about your knowledge of strategy sessions targeting minority witnesses. Caroline nodded, her usual composure fractured by exhaustion and stress. He wants me to file a motion tomorrow claiming we're dismissing charges because of newly discovered evidence about the phone theft. No mention of Blackwell and Stern, no acknowledgement of witness intimidation strategies. Washington removed her glasses, fixing Caroline with a penetrating stare. And if Judge Harrington questions you directly about those strategy sessions, Mercer suggested my memory might be conveniently incomplete. He suggested you commit perjury, Washington clarified, her tone leaving no room for euphemisms. Caroline didn't respond immediately, her gaze drifting to the window. The courthouse was visible in the distance, its limestone facade now illuminated by spotlights. How many times had she climbed those steps, confident in her purpose and her methods? How many defendants had she prosecuted using the same playbook that had nearly sent Derek Williams to prison for a crime he didn't commit? Why did you come to me? Washington asked, interrupting her thoughts. There are dozens of defense attorneys in this city who would jump at the chance to represent a prosecutor in trouble. Caroline met her gaze. Because you've spent your career fighting the exact system I've been part of. Because you've stood before me in court multiple times, representing clients I was determined to convict, and you never wavered in your principles. Even when you won, Washington noted. Especially then, Caroline admitted. Your closing argument in the Rodriguez case, you said the true measure of a justice system isn't how many people it punishes, but how carefully it distinguishes between the guilty and the innocent. Washington studied her carefully. That was 3 years ago. You still won that case. And Rodriguez accepted a plea deal for 8 years rather than risk 20 at trial, Caroline said quietly. He had 3 prior convictions for possession, So we elevated the charges to intent to distribute. Standard procedure. Standard procedure, Washington repeated, the words hanging between them like an indictment. And now? Caroline took a deep breath. Now I need to decide if I'm going to continue being part of that system, or if I'm going to do something to change it. Washington leaned back in her chair. As your attorney, I should advise you that cooperation with the investigation could potentially reduce any consequences you might face, but it would almost certainly end your career as a prosecutor. I know. As a human being, Washington continued, I would suggest that you consider what you can live with, not just professionally, but personally. When you look back on this moment years from now, which choice will you be able to defend to yourself? Before Caroline could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced down, her breath catching. They've identified the whistleblower from Blackwell and Stern. Washington moved around the desk to read the alert over her shoulder. Alicia Mendoza, she murmured. I know her. Brilliant young attorney, started in public defense before joining the firm last year. She looked up at Caroline. She was on the team that consulted on the Williams case, wasn't she? Caroline nodded slowly. She was. She seemed uncomfortable with some of the strategies being discussed, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed she was just new, still adjusting to how things really work. Or perhaps, Washington suggested, she never adjusted to how things really work, because she recognized it was fundamentally wrong. The implied comparison wasn't lost on Caroline. She stood abruptly, gathering her belongings. I need to think. The hearing is at 9 tomorrow, and I need to decide what motion I'm filing. Washington walked her to the door. Whatever you decide, I'll represent your interests to the best of my ability. But Caroline, she added, her voice softening slightly, there's representing your legal interests, and then there's representing your best interests as a human being. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. As Caroline stepped into the hallway, Washington called after her. One more thing. If you decide to break from Mercer's instructions, do not tell him in advance. The man has built his career on controlling narratives. He won't hesitate to throw you under the bus if he senses you're a liability. The elevator doors closed on Caroline's troubled expression, leaving her alone with choices that would define not just her future, but potentially the futures of countless defendants who might otherwise face the same system that had nearly claimed Derek Williams. Dawn broke over the city, painting the courthouse in soft golden light that belied the tension building within its walls. By 7:30, the demonstration outside had swelled, with community activists organizing a peaceful protest that stretched around the block. National news crews had arrived overnight, setting up temporary broadcast stations on the courthouse lawn. In the Williams apartment, Zoe sat at the kitchen table in her best dress, dark blue with small white flowers, pressed the night before, and hung carefully on her closet door. Letitia braided her daughter's hair with gentle fingers, the familiar rhythm calming them both. Remember what Mr. Chen said, Letitia murmured. Just tell the truth. Don't let anyone rush you or confuse you. I'm not scared anymore, Mama, Zoe replied with quiet determination. I just want Derek to come home. Across town, in her sparse apartment, Caroline Reed had barely slept. She stood before her bathroom mirror, applying makeup with mechanical precision, armor for the battle ahead. On her dining table lay 2 documents, 2 different motions, representing 2 different futures. One followed Mercer's instructions, dismissing charges while maintaining the fiction that Derek Williams' prosecution had been a good-faith error. The other acknowledged the full truth, including the targeting of minority witnesses and the improper relationship with Blackwell and Stern. She hadn't decided which one she would file. Her phone chimed with a message from Sophia Washington. Whatever you decide, I'll be there. Courthouse steps, 8:30. Caroline slipped both motions into her briefcase, knowing that the choice she made in the next hour would irrevocably alter her life's trajectory. At Blackwell & Stern, the mood was apocalyptic. Senior partners had been summoned for an emergency dawn meeting, security personnel swept the offices for additional leaks, and IT specialists worked frantically to determine exactly what documents Alicia Mendoza had accessed before her disappearance. "She's with the feds," Elliot Stern reported grimly, setting down his phone. "Our sources confirm she's been granted witness protection status and will testify at this morning's hearing." Arthur Blackwell, who had barely left the office in 36 hours, looked every one of his 67 years. "What exactly does she have?" "Everything," came a voice from the doorway. Jessica Harmon, the firm's head of information security, entered with a tablet displaying access logs. "Mendoza used her credentials to download our entire strategic consultation database, case files, training materials, billing records, the works." "How is that possible?" Blackwell demanded. "Those files require partner-level clearance." Harmon's expression was grim. "Someone gave her access. A senior partner's credentials were used to elevate her permissions 3 weeks ago." All eyes turned to Elliot Stern, whose face had gone ashen. "You gave a first-year associate access to our most sensitive files?" Blackwell's voice was dangerously quiet. "She's my goddaughter," Stern admitted, meeting his partner's incredulous stare. "I've known her since she was born. When she joined the firm, I thought she understood how things worked." "Clearly," Blackwell said icily, "she understood all too well." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Judge Harrington called the session to order. Derek Williams sat at the defense table beside Michael Chen, his expression carefully neutral. In the gallery behind them, Letitia and Zoe Williams were flanked by community supporters. Across the aisle, an unusually large contingent from the DA's office filled several rows, with Richard Mercer himself in the front, his piercing gaze fixed on the doors. When Caroline Reed entered, a murmur rippled through the room. She walked with deliberate steps to the prosecution table, alone, her expression unreadable. Washington had advised her to project confidence, regardless of her decision. "Never let them see the struggle," she'd counseled on the courthouse steps. "Only the resolution." "Good morning," Judge Harrington began, his voice cutting through the tension. "Before we proceed, I'd like to note for the record that this court has issued subpoenas for all documents related to consultations between the District Attorney's Office and Blackwell & Stern Law Firm, particularly as they pertain to the current case and any strategies specifically targeting minority defendants or witnesses." Mercer rose immediately. "Your Honor, the District Attorney's Office intends to file a motion to quash those subpoenas on grounds of attorney-client privilege and work product doctrine." "Noted," Harrington replied, his tone making it clear what he thought of that strategy. "Ms. Reed, I understand you have a motion before this court." Caroline stood, acutely aware of Mercer's eyes boring into her back. "Yes, Your Honor." She removed a single document from her briefcase, the weight of her decision settling around her shoulders like a mantle. "The state moves to dismiss all charges against Derek Williams." A collective intake of breath filled the courtroom. Letitia gripped Zoe's hand so tightly the girl winced. "On what grounds?" Harrington inquired, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Caroline straightened her shoulders, the die now cast. "On grounds that exculpatory evidence was deliberately withheld from the defense, that witness testimony was improperly targeted based on racial and socioeconomic factors, and that the prosecution's case was built on strategies designed to secure convictions rather than seek justice." Behind her, she heard Mercer curse under his breath. In the gallery, several of her colleagues from the DA's office shifted uncomfortably. "Furthermore," Caroline continued, her voice growing stronger, I wish to acknowledge on the record that consultations with Blackwell and Stern included explicit strategies for discrediting truthful testimony from minority witnesses, including the defendant's sister, Zoe Williams. Ms. Reed. Mercer stood, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. You do not have authorization to make these statements on behalf of the District Attorney's Office. I'm not speaking for the District Attorney's Office, Mr. Mercer, Caroline replied, turning to face him directly. I'm speaking for myself, as an officer of the court with an ethical obligation to the truth. Judge Harrington's gavel came down, silencing the murmurs that had erupted. Mr. Mercer, sit down. Ms. Reed, please continue. Caroline nodded, reaching back into her briefcase to withdraw a USB drive. Your Honor, I'm submitting evidence of my participation in these strategy sessions, including notes, recordings, and correspondence that corroborate Zoe Williams's testimony about what she overheard at Blackwell and Stern's offices. The courtroom exploded in commotion. Chen leaned over to Derek, speaking urgently in his ear. Zoe stared at Caroline with wide, disbelieving eyes, and Mercer's face contorted with a rage so palpable it seemed to radiate heat. Order! Harrington's gavel came down repeatedly until the room quieted. Ms. Reed, are you aware that by submitting this evidence, you may be implicating yourself in prosecutorial misconduct? I am, Your Honor, Caroline replied steadily. I am also prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation into these practices, which I believe extend far beyond the Williams case. Harrington studied her for a long moment before nodding. Very well. This court accepts your motion to dismiss all charges against Derek Williams. He turned to the defense table. Mr. Williams, you are free to go. The bailiff will process your release immediately. The Williams family embraced, tears flowing freely as Derek was unshackled. But Judge Harrington wasn't finished. This court is now turning its attention to the serious allegations of misconduct that have been raised. I am ordering an immediate evidentiary hearing regarding the relationship between the DA's office and Blackwell and Stern. He glanced at his watch. We will reconvene at 11 o'clock. Ms. Reed, Mr. Mercer, and representatives from Blackwell and Stern are ordered to be present, along with Alicia Mendoza and Zoe Williams. As the judge rose to leave, the courtroom erupted once more. Reporters rushed for the doors, desperate to file their stories. Caroline stood motionless at the prosecution table, the weight of her decision both crushing and oddly liberating. You've just committed career suicide, Mercer hissed as he passed her. But don't worry, you won't go down alone. I'll make sure of that. Caroline watched him storm out, then turned to find Sophia Washington making her way through the crowd. Well, Washington said with a small, approving smile, you certainly didn't do things halfway. Was it the right decision? Caroline asked, suddenly uncertain in the aftermath. Washington glanced toward the Williams family, still embracing amid tears of relief. Ask them. As if sensing the conversation, Zoe looked up, her eyes meeting Caroline's across the courtroom. The girl's expression was complex. Relief for her brother, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding that Caroline had finally chosen truth over victory, justice over advancement. Zoe nodded once, a small gesture that nonetheless felt like absolution. Now comes the hard part, Washington warned, gathering Caroline's materials. They'll fight back with everything they have. The 2-hour recess between hearings transformed the courthouse into a media frenzy. Reporters clamored for statements from anyone connected to the case, while inside the building, attorneys huddled in tense conversations, aware that decades of legal practices were suddenly under scrutiny. In a small conference room secured by federal agents, Alicia Mendoza prepared for her testimony. At 26, she was younger than most first-year associates at Blackwell and Stern, having worked as a paralegal for several years before attending law school at night. Her decision to join the prestigious firm had shocked her former colleagues at the public defender's office, but she'd had her reasons that now seemed vindicated. "Are you ready for this?" Agent Keller asked, sliding a glass of water across the table. Alicia nodded, her dark eyes resolute despite the circles beneath them. "I've been preparing for this since the day I accepted their job offer." "You infiltrated Blackwell and Stern deliberately?" Detective Donovan asked, surprised. "Infiltrated makes it sound more dramatic than it was," Alicia replied with a tired smile. "I simply took a job with the firm that had been systematically working to convict people from my community, knowing that the only way to expose their practices was from the inside." "And Elliot Stern helped you?" "Not intentionally." Alicia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's my godfather. My parents worked for his family when I was a child. He always took an interest in my education, encouraged me to become a lawyer. When I joined the firm, he was proud, wanted to mentor me." Her expression hardened. "He never imagined I'd use that access to document their discriminatory practices." "He'll feel betrayed," Keller noted. "Perhaps," Alicia acknowledged. "But I've spent the past year watching them construct elaborate strategies to ensure young men like Derek Williams end up in prison, regardless of evidence. Their betrayal of justice is far greater than my betrayal of Elliot's trust." In another conference room, Zoe Williams sat with her mother and Michael Chen, reviewing what she'd observed at Blackwell and Stern. Derek had been released from custody but was meeting with ACLU attorneys about their civil case, the sweet taste of freedom temporarily overshadowed by preparations for the upcoming hearing. "Just walk us through it one more time," Chen encouraged. "What exactly did you hear that night?" Zoe closed her eyes, concentrating. "I was in the small room next to the big conference room with the blue chairs. Mama told me to wait there while she finished cleaning the bathrooms." "The partners' lounge," Chen confirmed. "And the door was open?" "A little bit. I was doing my math homework when I heard them come in. They were laughing, talking about their dinner. Then a woman said they should get started with the Williams problem." "And you recognized that woman's voice in court as Caroline Reed?" Zoe nodded firmly. "I remember because she has a way of talking. Like her words are all sharp around the edges." Letitia squeezed her daughter's hand encouragingly. "They had a picture of me," Zoe continued. "Ms. Reed said, 'This is our problem witness.' Then a man said I looked appropriately innocent, but that my testimony could derail their case." "Did they mention your brother specifically?" "Yes. Someone said, 'The brother has a sealed juvie record, but the sister is clean. We need to make her testimony appear unreliable without making her appear victimized.'" Chen made notes, impressed by Zoe's detailed recall. "And what strategy did they discuss for cross-examination?" "They practiced questions," Zoe replied. "Ms. Reed kept saying the exact words she used in court, about how I was confused, how I couldn't keep my story straight. Another lawyer suggested she use a slightly condescending tone because he said, 'These kids from that neighborhood aren't used to standing up to authority figures.'" Chen underlined this in his notes. "And they knew your brother was innocent?" Zoe's expression grew troubled. "They talked about the phone theft report. Someone said it had been handled and wouldn't be an issue at trial." "Deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence," Chen murmured. "Clear Brady violation." "Will they go to jail?" Zoe asked suddenly. "The people who tried to send Derek to prison?" Chen and Letitia exchanged glances. "The legal system doesn't always work that way," Chen admitted. "But what you've done has forced people to look at practices that have been ignored for too long. That's a different kind of justice, but an important one." Caroline Reed stood alone in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The adrenaline of her courtroom decision had faded, leaving her shaky and uncertain. She'd spent her entire career building a reputation as a tough, effective prosecutor. Now, in the space of a morning, She'd become a whistleblower, viewed as either a traitor or a hero, depending on who was doing the viewing. The bathroom door swung open and Caroline straightened, expecting another hostile colleague. Instead, a young black woman in a judicial clerk's uniform entered, stopping short when she saw Caroline. "Sorry," the woman murmured, turning to leave. "No, please," Caroline said quickly. "I'm just leaving." The clerk hesitated, then stepped forward. "You're ADA Reed, right? The one who dismissed the Williams case?" Caroline nodded warily, bracing for condemnation. "Thank you," the clerk said softly. "My brother was prosecuted by this office 3 years ago. Took a plea deal even though he was innocent, because his public defender said fighting would mean 20 years instead of 5. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Maybe if someone had done what you did back then, he'd be home now." Before Caroline could respond, the clerk disappeared into a stall, leaving her staring at her own stunned reflection. Throughout her career, she'd viewed cases as wins or losses, defendants as challenges to overcome. She'd rarely considered the ripple effects of each prosecution, each plea deal, each strategic decision to withstand a defense challenge rather than examine its merit. How many Derek Williamses had she helped send to prison? How many families like the Williamses had she torn apart in the name of justice? Her phone buzzed. Sophia Washington texting that the hearing would reconvene in 10 minutes. Caroline dried her hands, straightened her jacket, and headed for the courtroom, where her testimony would either begin to repair the damage or deepen it beyond measure. When Judge Harrington called the evidentiary hearing to order, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. Legal observers from civil rights organizations lined the back wall, while law students squeezed into any available space, sensing they were witnessing a historic moment. "This hearing," Harrington began, "will address allegations of systematic prosecutorial misconduct involving the district attorney's office and Blackwell and Stern law firm. Due to the nature of these allegations, I've asked the Department of Justice to participate, and Agent Diana Keller will be permitted to question witnesses." Richard Mercer, now flanked by 2 attorneys from a rival firm to Blackwell and Stern, leaned forward with a scowl. Arthur Blackwell and Elliot Stern sat at a separate table, their usual commanding presence diminished by the circumstances. "First," Harrington continued, "I'd like to address Ms. Reed's motion to dismiss charges against Derek Williams, which I've granted. Mr. Williams is not required to be present for this hearing, though he is welcome to attend if he wishes." At the back of the courtroom, Derek slipped in quietly, taking a seat beside his mother and sister. He'd changed from his jail jumpsuit into clothes brought by his family, a simple button-down shirt and slacks that transformed him from defendant to observer. "I'll hear first from Alicia Mendoza," Harrington announced. As Alicia took the stand, Elliot Stern stared at his goddaughter with an expression of profound betrayal. She met his gaze briefly, then turned her attention to Judge Harrington as she was sworn in. "Ms. Mendoza," Agent Keller began, approaching the witness stand, "please explain your position at Blackwell and Stern and how you came to possess the documents you've provided to investigators." Alicia leaned toward the microphone. "I joined the firm last year as a first-year associate. Through my godfather, Elliot Stern, I was assigned to the Strategic Consultation Group, which advises the DA's office on high-priority prosecutions." "And what did you observe during your time with this group?" "I observed," Alicia replied, her voice steady, "a systematic approach to prosecuting cases based on the defendant's race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status." The courtroom fell silent as Alicia began to detail the practices that had operated in shadow for years, now dragged into the unforgiving light of judicial scrutiny. Alicia Mendoza's testimony unfolded like a meticulously crafted legal brief, each revelation more damning than the last. "The Strategic Consultation Group at Blackwell and Stern," she explained, maintained different protocols based on defendant demographics, with entirely separate playbooks for cases involving minority defendants. The firm's database categorized cases using a color-coded system, Alicia testified, gesturing to exhibits displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. Green cases involved white defendants from affluent neighborhoods. Blue cases involved white defendants from middle or working-class backgrounds. Red cases, she paused, meeting Elliot Stern's gaze briefly, involved minority defendants, regardless of socioeconomic status. And these categories determined the strategies employed? Agent Keller asked. Yes. Green cases emphasized rehabilitation potential, mitigating circumstances, and mental health considerations. Prosecutors were advised to consider diversion programs and reduce charges. Alicia's voice remained steady. Red cases focused exclusively on securing convictions through any available means, including witness intimidation, selective presentation of evidence, and what the firm called strategic omissions. From the defense table, Arthur Blackwell's attorney rose. Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Mendoza is characterizing standard legal strategy in prejudicial terms. I'm quoting directly from the firm's training materials, Alicia countered, holding up a document. Page 42, paragraph 3. Strategic omissions are particularly effective in red category cases, where defendants often lack resources to conduct independent investigations. Judge Harrington's expression darkened. Objection overruled. Continue, Ms. Mendoza. Alicia outlined how the firm tracked conviction rates by category, with bonuses tied to successful outcomes in red cases. She described training sessions where junior associates role-played cross-examinations designed to confuse and intimidate minority witnesses, including children. Then she turned to the Williams case specifically. Derek Williams was classified as a priority red case because of several factors: his sealed juvenile record, the gang-related nature of the charges, and, she hesitated, his potential value in what the firm called cascade prosecutions. Explain cascade prosecutions, Keller instructed. It's a strategy where one conviction becomes leverage for additional prosecutions within the same community. The defendant is offered reduced sentencing in exchange for information implicating others, regardless of whether that information is accurate. In the gallery, Derek Williams stiffened, recalling the interrogation where detectives had promised leniency if he would give up names of other gang members, despite his repeated insistence that he had no gang affiliations. And Zoe Williams? Keller prompted. What discussion occurred regarding her testimony? The firm identified her as a problematic truth-teller, their term for witnesses whose honest testimony contradicted the prosecution's narrative. Alicia pulled another document from her folder. This strategy memo, dated 3 weeks before trial, outlines specific approaches for undermining her credibility without appearing overtly aggressive toward a child witness. As the document was displayed on the courtroom screens, Caroline Reed closed her eyes briefly, recognizing her own handwriting in the margins. Notes about tone, about pacing, about precisely how to make a 12-year-old girl doubt her own memories. Ms. Mendoza, Judge Harrington interjected, were you present at the strategy session that Zoe Williams overheard? Yes, Your Honor. It was my second consultation involving the Williams case. And her recollection of what was said, is it accurate? Alicia nodded firmly. Remarkably so. She even correctly identified the blue chairs, which are unique to the partners' conference room where these high-priority consultations occurred. Elliot Stern finally broke his silence. Your Honor, I'd like to question the witness. Judge Harrington hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Mr. Stern. Stern approached the witness stand, his normally imposing presence somehow diminished. Alicia, when you joined the firm, you took an oath of confidentiality. You signed agreements protecting proprietary information. Did you intend to violate those agreements from the beginning? Alicia met his gaze steadily. I intended to uphold my oath as an attorney to seek justice and protect the rule of law. When those obligations conflicted with firm policies that systematically discriminated against minority defendants, my ethical duty was clear. You deliberately betrayed the firm's trust, Stern pressed. You betrayed my trust. With respect, Uncle Elliot, Alicia replied, using the familiar address deliberately. The firm betrayed the trust of the justice system. I simply exposed that betrayal. Stern's expression hardened. Your parents worked for my family for 20 years. I paid for your education, wrote your law school recommendation. This is how you repay that generosity? You taught me that the law should be applied equally, Alicia responded, her voice softening slightly. That integrity matters above all else. I'm simply putting those lessons into practice. As Stern returned to his seat, Agent Keller produced one final exhibit, a statistical analysis of case outcomes over the past 5 years. Ms. Mendoza, can you explain what these numbers represent? These are conviction rates and sentencing disparities for cases where Blackwell and Stern consulted with the DA's office. Alicia pointed to the highlighted sections. For equivalent charges and similar criminal histories, minority defendants received sentences averaging 47% longer than white defendants. They were also 89% more likely to have their cases prosecuted fully rather than resolved through plea negotiations. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the implications sank in. This wasn't about one case or one prosecutor. It was evidence of systemic bias engineered and implemented by some of the city's most respected legal minds. When Alicia's testimony concluded, Judge Harrington called a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, Caroline Reed remained seated at the prosecution table, the weight of her complicity pressing down like a physical force. She had known about these practices, had participated in them, benefited from them, advanced her career through them, yet had somehow maintained the fiction that she was serving justice. Sophia Washington slid into the seat beside her. "You're next," she said quietly. "Are you ready?" Caroline stared at the defense table where Derek Williams had been sitting just days ago, facing a lifetime in prison for a crime he didn't commit. "What if I can't remember everything? All the cases, all the defendants?" "You can't," Washington said bluntly. "No one could. This isn't about perfect recall. It's about acknowledging the pattern and your role in it." When court resumed, Caroline took the stand with leaden feet. After being sworn in, she faced not Agent Keller, but Michael Chen, who had requested the opportunity to question her. "Ms. Reed," Chen began, his tone professionally neutral despite the circumstances, "how many cases have you prosecuted since joining the DA's office?" 217, Caroline answered. 63 went to trial. The rest were resolved through plea agreements. "And how many of those defendants were people of color?" Caroline swallowed. 192. A soft gasp rippled through the gallery at the stark disparity. "When did you first begin working with Blackwell and Stern on case strategy?" "Almost immediately after joining the DA's office," Caroline admitted. "Richard Mercer introduced me to Arthur Blackwell during my first week. He said their strategic consulting would help me navigate the complexities of prosecution." "Were you aware of the different case categories Ms. Mendoza described?" Caroline nodded slowly. "Yes. The color coding system was explained during my orientation at the firm." "Did you ever question this approach?" Caroline stared at her hands. "I rationalized it. Told myself it was about efficient resource allocation, about focusing efforts where they would have the most impact." She looked up, meeting Chen's gaze directly. "But the truth is, it was convenient. It made my job easier. The firm provided templates, strategies, even suggested phrasings for different types of witnesses. All I had to do was follow the playbook." "And in the Williams case specifically," Chen continued, Did you personally participate in strategizing how to discredit Zoe's testimony despite knowing she was telling the truth? The courtroom fell silent, waiting for her answer. Caroline felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Mercer's furious glare, Judge Harrington's measured assessment, and somewhere in the gallery, Zoe Williams, the child she had planned to destroy on the witness stand. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew her brother was likely innocent. I knew she was telling the truth. And I prepared to discredit her anyway, because that's what the system rewarded me for doing." Caroline's admission hung in the air, a truth so rarely spoken aloud in these hallowed halls that it seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the courtroom. Michael Chen paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. "Ms. Reed," he said finally, "would you say the Williams case was unusual, or was it representative of how cases involving minority defendants were typically handled?" "It was standard procedure," Caroline replied, her voice stronger now. "The only unusual aspect was getting caught." At the prosecution table, Richard Mercer conferred urgently with his attorneys, their expressions grim. Blackwell and Stern sat stone-faced, the empire they'd built threatening to crumble beneath the weight of exposed truths. "In your experience," Chen continued, "how widespread was knowledge of these practices within the legal community?" Caroline considered the question carefully. It wasn't explicitly discussed outside certain circles, but the results were visible to anyone paying attention. The conviction rates, the sentencing disparities, the data has always been there. We all just chose not to examine it too closely. Chen nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. "And what about Judge Whitman, who dismissed previous motions questioning the relationship between the DA's office and Blackwell and Stern? Was he aware of these practices?" "Objection!" Mercer's attorney stood. "Calls for speculation." "Sustained," Judge Harrington ruled. "Rephrase, Mr. Chen." Chen adjusted smoothly. "Did you ever participate in strategy sessions where Judge Whitman's role in protecting these arrangements was discussed?" Caroline met Mercer's glare across the courtroom. "Yes. Richard Mercer specifically mentioned that certain cases should be steered toward Whitman's courtroom because he understands how the game is played." The gallery erupted in murmurs, and Judge Harrington's gavel came down sharply. "Order!" When the room quieted, Chen had one final question. "Ms. Reed, why are you testifying today? Why break ranks now after years of participation in this system?" Caroline's eyes found Zoe Williams in the gallery, the girl's steady gaze neither accusing nor forgiving, simply present and witnessing. "Because Zoe Williams forced me to see what I'd been willfully ignoring, that we weren't pursuing justice, we were manufacturing convictions. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it." Chen thanked her and returned to his seat. Richard Mercer's attorney rose for cross-examination, his approach immediately aggressive. "Ms. Reed, isn't it true that you're offering this testimony to save yourself from potential criminal charges?" "I'm fully aware that my testimony may result in charges against me," Caroline replied evenly. "I've received no promises of immunity." "Yet you've hired defense counsel," the attorney pressed, gesturing toward Sophia Washington. "Yes, because I intend to take responsibility for my actions while ensuring my rights are protected." The attorney shifted tactics. "You've described a system that, according to you, treated minority defendants unfairly. Yet you participated in this system for years, building your career on these convictions. Doesn't that make you a hypocrite?" Caroline didn't flinch. "It makes me complicit. I'm not claiming moral superiority. I'm acknowledging my role in a deeply flawed system and trying to correct it, however belatedly." "Isn't it more accurate to say you're sacrificing others to save yourself? Throwing your colleagues under the bus when the political winds shifted?" Caroline shook her head. I'm simply telling the truth about practices that have destroyed countless lives. What happens to my career is secondary to correcting those injustices." When cross-examination concluded, Judge Harrington called Richard Mercer to the stand. The district attorney moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being on the other side of questioning, but the slight tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. After being sworn in, Mercer immediately went on the offensive. "Your Honor, I want to state for the record that any improper practices Ms. Reed engaged in were not sanctioned by my office. We maintain the highest ethical standards." "Mr. Mercer," Judge Harrington interrupted, "you're not making opening statements. Please respond to questions as they're asked." Agent Keller took the lead in questioning Mercer, her approach methodical and relentless. She established his history with Blackwell and Stern. He had been a senior partner there before becoming district attorney 8 years ago. She traced the consulting arrangement back to his first month in office. Then she produced a series of emails that made Mercer's composed facade crack visibly. "These communications between you and Arthur Blackwell," Keller said, displaying the emails on the courtroom screens, "explicitly discuss maintaining demographic balance in the system and ensuring appropriate consequences for priority communities. Can you explain what these phrases mean?" Mercer cleared his throat. "Those are taken out of context. We were discussing resource allocation. In this email," Keller continued undeterred, "you write, 'The Williams case provides an excellent opportunity to solidify our gang task force statistics before the budget review.' What statistics were you referring to?" "The mayor's office requires data on our anti-gang initiatives," Mercer replied stiffly. "We track prosecutions as part of our performance metrics." "Even when the defendant has no actual gang affiliations?" Keller asked. "Because our investigation has found no evidence connecting Derek Williams to any gang activity. That determination is made based on multiple factors, including living in certain neighborhoods," Keller pressed, "having certain demographic characteristics." As Mercer's testimony continued, his careful denials began to crumble under the weight of documentation that Alicia Mendoza had provided. Strategy memos bearing his signature, calendar entries for red case reviews, billing records showing his personal approval of Blackwell and Stern's consulting fees. By the time Judge Harrington called a recess for lunch, the gallery was buzzing with speculation about potential criminal charges against Mercer and others involved in the scandal. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of protesters had swelled, joined now by law students from local universities and community activists energized by the morning's revelations. During the break, Caroline found herself in the courthouse cafeteria, isolated at a small table in the corner. The colleagues who had once sought her company now gave her a wide berth, as if her whistleblower status might be contagious. She picked at a salad without appetite, reviewing her testimony in her mind and wondering if she'd said enough, or perhaps too much. A tray clattered onto the table opposite her, startling her from her thoughts. Zoe Williams stood there, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. "Can I sit?" she asked, her expression unreadable. Caroline nodded, stunned by the girl's approach. "Of course." Zoe settled into the chair, arranging her lunch methodically. A sandwich, an apple, a carton of milk. For a moment she said nothing, simply organizing her meal with the precision of a ritual. "My mama says you did a brave thing," she finally said, not looking up. "Standing up to those people you work with." Caroline wasn't sure how to respond. "I should have done it sooner." "Yeah," Zoe agreed matter-of-factly. "You should have." She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. "But my grandma always says better late than never." The simplicity of the statement, coming from this child who had shown more courage than most adults in the courthouse, brought unexpected tears to Caroline's eyes. "Your brother, how is he doing?" "He's okay. Scared still, but okay." Zoe studied Caroline with that direct gaze that had first unsettled her in the courtroom. He says he doesn't hate you, says you were just doing your job. That's generous of him. Zoe shrugged. Derek's like that. Me, I was real mad at first. But then I heard you in court today saying all those true things even though they're gonna get you in trouble. She took another bite, considering. That counts for something, I guess. Before Caroline could respond, Sophia Washington approached, eyeing the unexpected lunch companions with surprise. Sorry to interrupt, but Judge Harrington is reconvening early. There's been a development. As they gathered their things, Zoe looked up at Caroline. Are they going to put you in jail? The question, asked with a child's directness, caught Caroline off guard. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. Zoe nodded solemnly. That wouldn't be fair. Not when you're finally doing the right thing. With that assessment hanging in the air, they made their way back to the courtroom, where Judge Harrington's grim expression suggested that the afternoon session would bring even more seismic revelations to the city's justice system. When Judge Harrington called the court back to order, the tension in the room had shifted from anticipation to something more solemn. He addressed the gallery with measured words that nonetheless landed like thunder. During our recess, I was informed that Judge Walter Whitman has recused himself from all current and pending cases and submitted his resignation to the Judicial Ethics Committee. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. Additionally, the State Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation into the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office, and the State Bar Association has convened an emergency ethics panel to review the licenses of all attorneys implicated in today's testimony. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Whitman had been a fixture on the bench for almost 2 decades, his courtroom known for swift convictions and harsh sentences, particularly for minority defendants. Furthermore, Harrington continued once order was restored, I've been authorized to inform the court that a federal grand jury has been impaneled to consider criminal charges related to civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against rights under color of law. Richard Mercer's face had gone ashen. Arthur Blackwell stared straight ahead, his usual imperious demeanor replaced by the grim resignation of a man watching his legacy crumble in real time. Before we proceed with final testimonies, I want to address one more matter. Harrington's gaze swept the courtroom. The Williams case represents a single instance of what appears to be a systemic problem. Accordingly, I am ordering a comprehensive review of all cases prosecuted by this district attorney's office over the past 8 years, where Blackwell and Stern provided consultation. In the gallery, a collective intake of breath. 8 years of cases, potentially hundreds of convictions, now subject to review. For any individuals currently incarcerated based on such convictions, I'm ordering an expedited review process with a presumption toward release pending new proceedings. Harrington's voice hardened. The burden will be on the state to demonstrate that these convictions were obtained legitimately, without the discriminatory practices described in today's testimony. Derek Williams reached for his mother's hand, both of them processing the implications. How many others like him might soon walk free? The afternoon proceeded with testimony from Arthur Blackwell and Elliot Stern, both men attempting to characterize their firm's practices as standard legal strategy rather than systemic discrimination. But the documentation Alicia Mendoza had provided left little room for plausible deniability. Their own words, preserved in emails, memos, and billing records, painted a damning picture of justice corrupted by prejudice and profit. When Zoe Williams finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She looked smaller behind the witness box, but her voice was clear and unwavering as she recounted exactly what she had overheard that night at Blackwell and Stern. They were laughing, she said, the detail landing with particular impact. Like it was funny, figuring out how to make me mess up even though I was telling the truth. Michael Chen guided her testimony gently, allowing Zoe to tell her story in her own words. When he finished, Arthur Blackwell's attorney declined to cross-examine, a tacit acknowledgement that questioning would only make his client appear worse. As the hearing concluded, Judge Harrington addressed the courtroom one final time. The revelations today have exposed profound failures in our justice system, failures that have disproportionately harmed communities of color and undermined the constitutional rights of countless defendants. These aren't merely procedural errors or isolated instances of misconduct. They represent a deliberate subversion of justice itself. He looked directly at the tables where Mercer, Blackwell, and Stern sat with their attorneys. I expect full cooperation with all investigations, and I assure you that any attempt to obstruct or influence these proceedings will be met with the full force of judicial authority. Outside the courthouse, as dusk settled over the city, the crowds had only grown. News of the day's testimony had spread rapidly, drawing people from across the community who sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the local justice system. Caroline Reed emerged to find Sophia Washington waiting near the steps. "What happens now?" Caroline asked, watching as reporters surrounded the Williams family at the bottom of the steps. "For you? Likely a negotiated agreement with the DOJ and State Attorney General. Suspension of your law license, possibly some form of probation." Washington's assessment was candid, but not unkind. "Your cooperation has value, especially if you're willing to testify against Mercer and others." "And my career as a prosecutor?" "Over," Washington confirmed. "But there might be a different path forward. The ACLU is establishing an accountability initiative focused on prosecutorial reform. They mentioned your name as someone with valuable insider perspective." Caroline laughed without humor. "From prosecutor to prison reform advocate, quite the career pivot." "Redemption rarely follows a straight line," Washington observed. Across the plaza, Alicia Mendoza was surrounded by law students, answering questions about her decision to expose Blackwell and Stern's practices. Elliot Stern watched from a distance, his expression a complex mixture of betrayal and reluctant pride. Derek Williams stood with his arm around Zoe's shoulders, fielding questions from reporters with newfound confidence. "I'm just grateful to be home with my family," he said. "But there are thousands of others still incarcerated based on the same corrupt practices. They deserve justice too." As the crowd began to disperse, Caroline found herself face to face with the Williams family. An awkward silence fell between them, prosecutor and almost victim, separated by the narrow margin of a truth accidentally overheard. "Ms. Reed," Letitia Williams said finally, her voice neither warm nor cold, simply resolute. "I want to thank you for telling the truth today. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Caroline admitted, "but it was necessary." She looked at Derek, standing tall despite all the system had put him through. "I'm sorry for what almost happened to you, for what has happened to so many others." Derek studied her for a long moment. "Words are a start," he said finally. "But this system needs more than apologies. It needs change." "We're going to make sure of that," Zoe added with the certainty of youth. "Right, Mama?" Letitia nodded, her arm tightening around her daughter's shoulders. "That's right. Starting with the Community Oversight Board the mayor just announced. I've been asked to serve as a founding member." Caroline felt a surge of genuine admiration for this family that had faced the full weight of a corrupted system and emerged not just intact, but determined to transform it. "They couldn't have chosen better," she said sincerely. As they parted ways, the Williams family toward a future brightened by justice served, Caroline toward an uncertain path of accountability and atonement. Zoe turned back suddenly. "Ms. Reed," she called, her voice carrying across the plaza. "Remember what you said in court? About how once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it?" Caroline nodded, remembering the moment of testimony that had felt like confession. "Well," Zoe continued with the simple wisdom that had catalyzed an entire movement for change. Now everyone sees it, so things have to be different. The words hung in the air like a promise and a challenge combined. As Caroline watched the Williams family walk away, she thought about all the invisible systems that had shaped her career, all the unspoken biases she had internalized and perpetuated. She thought about Derek Williams, who had nearly lost his freedom, and all the others who hadn't been fortunate enough to have a sister in the right place at the right time. Most of all, she thought about Zoe, a child who had shown more courage in speaking truth to power than most adults ever would. A girl who had looked at a system designed to discount her voice and had refused to be silenced. The plaza was nearly empty now. The day's drama concluded, but its consequences just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new headlines, new investigations, new reckonings. For now, though, a single truth remained, spoken by a child but powerful enough to shake the foundations of a system built on injustice. Once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it, and neither could anyone else, ever again.